Hello, everybody. Miles Kessler here, and welcome to another one of the Integral Dojo's community calls. This is for our series of dialogues on Aikido and non-duality. The previous call, we were together with Cisco Sensei. It was a really enriching and nourishing and very interesting conversation we had. And today I'm with, I always say the same thing, Patrick. I'm with my old teaching buddy, my Aikido brother. I say old because Patrick and I are back in that. We didn't start together. We didn't start at the same time in the same place. But we, in our early formative years, we lived and trained together in Iwama, Japan. And we were, for better and worse, we were profoundly shaped there. And we actually started teaching English together.
Yes.
We would team teach some English classes. So we have a history going way back to 1989 or 90 or whatever it was of teaching together. And we actually, maybe you'll mention it at the end of the call today, Patrick. We actually, in about a month's time, we have another big seminar in Switzerland called the Riviera Seminar.
Right.
Cool. So today we're going to, as I said, we're going to continue in the series on Aikido and non-duality. And Patrick had a great suggestion about today's topic, today's specific topic, even though Aikido and non-duality is the topic. It's about the conditions for tasting or for achieving or for attaining or for shifting into non-duality in Aikido. And it's a fantastic topic. It's something I think we have a lot to say. So Patrick, with that, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Miles. And I, again, just want to call out and say thank you for making this process available to share via online. And it's a topic that's, close to, actually emerges from my heart as well as yours, I think. There's fundamentally a call that I think I felt, and I've seen you echo that as well in your own words, a call to something deeper that I think in a certain way paralleled or in some way resonated in our practice of Aikido. And that call to discover some form of deeper fundamental connection to a source that lies within. And so the topic for this evening's conversation is, how do we encourage ourselves? How do we set ourselves up to become available to a perspective of non-duality? It's not something that you can do per se. It's not, if there was a process that anybody could repeat and it would result in a perspective of non-duality, then everybody would be able to just repeat the process. And so that's what makes it so difficult. In a way, it's not a process that can be reproduced. In a little bit, it parallels the experience of falling in love. When you fall in love, it happens, but it's not something that you can make happen. And opening up to a perspective of non-duality resonates or is similar in that kind of experience. There are things that we can make ourselves available to, and this is what I was hoping that Miles, you and I could discuss, is laying out the platform so that we become available to this non-dual perspective. In a way, Ken Wilber says, arriving at a perspective of non-duality is, in a certain way, it has a certain kind of accidental nature to it. It just kind of happens. But he says there are things that can make you accident prone, and making yourself prone to stumbling upon or opening up to a larger perspective beyond our limited narrative or a limited personal story of our particular life. And that, to go beyond that particular personal narrative, is there are conditions, that there are things that we can engage in, that we can invite, that we can start to consider, and also become in contact with our own inspiration and internal inspirations that make it available. And to a certain degree, I suspect that everybody listening has had, on a certain level, a perspective or a taste of something non-dual in one part of their life or another. So I don't think that most people probably wouldn't be listening to this if they hadn't been drawn to it already. So the question really is, how do we make ourselves more available to this perspective that we feel so drawn by or so inspired by, and do it in a way that that allows us to be ready to receive it when it does arrive. And I think that for me is the topic that that I thought we could explore. And I don't know, Miles, do you want to jump in and add anything to that?
Sure. Well, yeah, a few things. I mean, it's really is a tricky. First, talking about non-duality is always a tricky thing. For those who've been in the non-dual circles, you know how that can be. And there's nothing that we can say. It's like Patrick said, there's nothing that we can do to fall in love. It happens. There's nothing we can say, or there's no school we can join, or no organization or technique that you can do, a method you can do to have a taste of the non-dual. It just happens. And many of the non-dual schools, actually, their teachings are not non-dual teachings per se. They're non-dual pointing out instructions. So they point to the non-dual. And this came up, Patrick. I wanted to talk to you. We'll do this offline a little bit. But I wanted to talk about the conversation I had with Dan. It was really great because he was. I don't even remember what he was talking about, but he was saying several things. But basically, the whole idea is that you can't get there from here. But when you get yourself right, there comes over here, in a way. And that's still a very here-there type of dualistic thing. But basically, he's talking about that shift, that thing that happens. And when that happens, everything aligns up into this kind of unitative field. And there is quite literally nothing, like Patrick said, there's nothing you can do to make that happen. But what you can do is that you can work quite a bit on the conditions for those things to happen. And it might be helpful even to maybe just to draw a little bit of a distinction of what certainly in Aikido, what non-duality is not. And by the way, I do want to kind of just add an additional, an additional, I think, a very important point to make is that, Aikido, in the way of harmony, Aikido, our practice is not really in the path of harmony. Our practice is the path of conflict. If there's no conflict, if there's no boundaries rubbing against each other, causing friction and tension and conflict, then there's no need for Aikido. And paradoxically or ironically, the very conflict it does everything inside of us to be dualistic. So the conditions for being dualistic, for creating separation inside of us, or with me and another boundary that I'm running into or rubbing up against, become highly intensified. And in that sense, it's even more difficult to taste non-duality. But as Patrick will attest, it's an amazing doorway. Aikido is an amazing doorway. It's an amazing path for actually discovering non-duality because of the nature of conflict itself.
And I think I would add along that Aikido is an incredible way to embody that perspective in some of the most challenging experiences that we have as a human being, which is in conflict. Yeah. So to be able to taste that perspective of non-duality and fundamentally continue to resonate from there, or be consciously act from there in the midst of conflict, is essentially bringing that perspective of unity and that perspective of perfection, or that perspective of freedom, into the dichotomy and the challenge of experiencing conflict and all of the aggression and the fear and the tension that can rise up in that, and being able to be able to hold that perspective simultaneously while facing that aggression, that fear, and that contraction in conflict is an essential kind of crucible where the perspective becomes brought down to earth in a very real and fundamental way, which I think is what Sensei was trying to share in his teachings, was this realization of unity and this freedom that he had discovered through his spiritual inquiry, and his embodiment of that in his in the art of Aikido and the
as the art of Aikido.
Exactly, yeah.
That was his embodied expression of non-duality.
Exactly, right. And then the freedom that comes from that, and I think that's what makes his videos so incredibly intriguing, is that you see that freedom under pressure, and he's just free. He's like, I had the impression that Sensei came up with this perspective. He says, hey, we're one, and let me prove it to you. Come here and attack me. And his expression of this freedom in the midst of this realization of unity, I mean, this expression of freedom in the midst of conflict, was his kind of joy, his ability to kind of experience this freedom that had no separation under the pressure from Azukes. And that's what I think is so intriguing about his videos, that you get a sense of that when you're watching him move and when you're watching him express himself through the art.
Yeah, and I would even add, and Patrick, I'm sure you agree with me that and it's a bit of a bold statement to make, but without a taste of a non-duality, or without an embodied taste of non-duality, you're really never going to get what Aikido is. And Aikido is a lot. It's a lot of, on the dual side of the street, the techniques and styles and the things we do in the ranks. My God, we can spend years doing it, but only with that embodied experience of non-duality in the midst of what we do in Aikido, so-called conflict. When you get that, you actually get what's going on.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, Patrick?
I think that's true, and I think you get the taste of the reason why you're doing Aikido. But I think it's important to point out that in no way, shape, or form are you going to be perfect at Aikido at that point in time. You're just going to get it. Even though
that experience in and of itself is perfect.
Yes, yeah. And there is the whole crisis of evolving to embody that which you have realized is already there. And I distinguish the two by, the realization of falling in love and the capacity to develop yourself to become a good partner. Right. Falling in love, everything's perfect. It's like, it's already perfect at the beginning. It's complete. It's so overflowing, but it doesn't necessarily mean you've developed the capacity to be a good listener or to share your life with another person or to fundamentally interact at that level of what it means to be a partner. And I think therein lies what we're looking at about being fundamentally fully engaged with that perspective of unity and that perspective of freedom. And being under the crisis of trying to embody that in conflict. It takes time. So you get this shift of this realization of non-duality, and then the process of developing the capacity to embody and express that in a coherent and congruent way. And that's where the training happens. So even after the perspective of that may occur in a moment of realization of I am not separate from the world around me, there takes time to kind of make that home base for your conscious being, and that takes practice, and it's so different than what we've been brought up to perceive as reality that it can be overwhelming at that first initial opening, and in a way kind of earth-shattering to see I have no borders. Who I am is fundamentally not separate from my experience. The totality of my experience is a part of my actual being, and that opening to that on a certain level is a dissolution of that identification of with a separate self of being. And I don't want to go too far on that, but it can be so incredibly jarring to our sense of reality that it takes a while to digest that. And the digestion of that, Aikido can help with the digestion of that non-dual perspective into making that something that can be actually lived in a congruent way, and the realization in that non-separation that you are still fundamentally here as an individual, and that's another step of bringing that perspective of no limitation into a very kind of actual individuated and unique expression through each individual. But I think we're going too far. I'd like to kind of go dial back and talk about what were some of the conditions that helped you, Miles. I can share my own, but maybe we can start with you. What did you see as precursors to that first initial glimpse of no limitation, and what were the precursors that you felt were actually that helped for you in terms of stumbling onto a perspective that has no second, or there is nothing beyond it, if I could say so.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. Is that different than what I was going to talk about? I was going to talk about the conditions and kind of, no, it's fine, and it's in the list, you know.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm intrigued by that question. I mean, you know, when I initially had started, first there was something there that was calling me. You know, I felt why I did other martial arts as a kid and a young man, but Aikido really was speaking to me personally, and it was definitely that spiritual aspect, definitely O Sensei's promise, you know, just who he was, and the kind of, you know, there was a kind of a hero's journey call. So I would say that in a way, in one sense, that was the absolute, you know, getting a glimpse of the absolute through that archetype of O Sensei. And then actually doing Aikido and just feeling engaged with something that was greater than me. And, you know, and learning, even though I was learning forms that were very harmonious, that those were somehow tastes. I wouldn't say that it was definitely an opening to the non-dual or the absolute, but the training methodologies I felt were very unifying, and that's, if I just kind of weave that answer in with what I consider some of the conditions. You know, first, technical training is never going to get you to non-duality. You know, 1,000 ikkyos is just 1,000 ikkyos. Or as our teacher Saito Sensei used to say, 1,000 times 0 equals 0. You know, and you can do technique all day long, and you'll just, you know, you can do it till you're, you know, old man, old woman. You're just going to end up with bad joints and you know, not such a functional body, and you know, the body has its limitations, and you can get better, faster, stronger until you get weaker and you know, and slower and whatever. Everybody slows down. So technical training in and of itself will not get you there, but technical training that is principles based will. Because I believe that, you know, at the beginning, everybody starts, we get some taste of the principles. And the principles, I guess, for me was always that taste of non-duality, where, you know, you just drop into the present moment, past and future fall away. You start to taste a little bit of a flow state. You know, you're not so concerned with a technical way to do things right and wrong, which is something we need. That's building the conditions. But if it's a principles-based practice, and if you have a teacher who's expressing those principles, or a community who's actually aligning with those principles, you will resonate with that. You will attenuate to that just naturally, and you'll start to kind of move into that same sense of flow. And the thing is, the principles slowly begin to penetrate into you. And as the more you align with the principles of Aikido, and the less you align with my egoic striving and active and pushing and pulling and leverage and bumping and bouncing and all those things that I like to do, throw somebody or not be thrown or whatever, achieve, or all those things that we do, the more that you align with the principles, the more the sense of self relaxes the back. And at a certain point, when you really penetrate the principles, you get a deep enough taste of the principles, they start to become an expression. They start to express themselves out of you. And that taste, you kind of begin to realize in that moment that the expression of that principle is way more important than any type of technical effectiveness. And sure, technical effectiveness is great or whatever. It's an interesting thing to train in Aikido, especially if you're younger and you're more concerned about self-defense and stuff like that. It's an okay path. It has its limits, and hopefully you'll reach those limits, and hopefully you'll realize, oh, I need to go beyond that. And the only place to go is into principles, because it's principles first, always. And so that's kind of so principles I'm talking about, things like centering, things like connecting, things like opening, allowing, things like being present, flow. These are all principles that we can engage. And as we're engaging those, we're beginning to taste the non-dual. Now, the reason I say that we're beginning to taste the non-dual is because you can still engage those principles from an egoic place, from a dualistic place. But the more, if you allow the principles to penetrate you, they will begin to change you from the inside out. So if I just back up one point, Patrick, and then I'll pass it back to you.
Sure.
I think the first thing that we need to do in Aikido, the first condition we need to set is shifting to an interior understanding of an understanding or awareness of our own interiors, because that's where the principles exist. And then an understanding of awareness, when we get that, we start to have an understanding and awareness of the interiors of others. And then we can begin to align in a way that we have an interior that happens between the two. Then the unity of principles in one and the unity in principles of the other become principles of union between two people. And then you start to get a taste of the non-dual. So that's one condition: interior awareness and accessing the principles, even if you're doing technical training, especially if you're doing technical training, I should say, accessing the principles of the art.
I agree with you, and I think there's a statement that Pierre Teilhard de Chardin makes a statement. He said that evolution is actually leading towards life becoming increasing its capacity for what he refers to as interiority, or the experience of the our internal state, which opens up in meditation, opens up in yoga, opens up in those contemplative practices that increase our sensitivity to our own internal state, which then opens us up to experiencing other people's internal state. And then that field that is shared, when you become available to that principle of activating that experience of that unity between self and other, and that field of sensitivity that can open when that appears, as a jazz quartet or people doing jazz, improv jazz, can open up to that shared state of being, and they realize that they are fundamentally one small part of one larger part, which contains the whole, and they have a direct experience of non-duality, even though they may not necessarily recognize it. They're, in a way, kind of abiding in it. And I think so there is a certain kind of recognition which is necessary when these principles are activated in our practice. But I would also say that there's some emotional shift in consciousness where the person becomes more interested in one thing versus another thing. And oftentimes what we're looking at when we start Aikido is that we're interested, most people are interested in a certain level of power over their environment. That they develop, they want that path of power to influence and to protect and maybe to do it in harmony, to be able to express power without destroying another. But still fundamentally that path of power is one of the most seductive and strongest motivators that a lot of people have on the path of Aikido. Anybody who commits to it, I think, has been touched by that desire. There's nothing wrong with power. Power is a wonderful thing. But if power is the primary motivator for you to practice Aikido, I think it can block you from actually discovering this non-dual perspective. And because I think there's another motivator, another form of inspiration, which brings you face and face with that capacity to be available for that non-duality to rise up in your consciousness. And I think there is it's not a power, it's not a desire for power, but it's a deep appreciation for being free in the relationship, in that moment of being with Uke and being in that relationship. You're suddenly relishing that capacity to be with the other person and not be a victim to the other person, to be more interested in that kind of state of freedom under pressure, and to be drawn by that state of freedom, that freedom in relationship, and that capacity to be with another person, but not to take the pressure personally, not to draw yourself into a competitive or conflictual narrative, but you suddenly are starting to step out of that narrative and realize that there's so much space to be with the other when you're no longer against the other. And when that occurs, when that starts to happen, I think that's when the non-dual starts to percolate up in your consciousness. You become more attracted to something deeper than just the power over another person, but you start to become attracted to the fundamental sense of being with the other in a way that honors yourself and also honors the relationship. And there's a certain kind of, what I would say, a freedom that is realized in that place. That freedom has got nothing to do with stopping the other person from doing whatever they happen to be doing. It's a realization that's fundamentally inherent inside yourself. And somehow Aikido can open ourselves up to this realization that in this moment, what I'm doing, how I'm responding to you is my response to you. But there's a certain assumption that I had that I need to respond to you in order to protect my freedom. But actually, I start to realize that actually the freedom that exists within inside myself is not something that the attacker could ever take. It's not something that the attacker could ever
diminish.
Yeah. It's like when you get grabbed by somebody and you realize it doesn't matter how strong you grab me, you will never be able to grab who I am. Because who I am is not a grabbable thing. You can grab my body, but who I am is ungraspable. And there's a deep joy in that realization and a great capacity to respond outside of the box of me against you. And that for me is Aikido. It just gets out of the box of that narrative, and the non-dual completely contains it and says, you, in the realization of non-duality, freedom, or in Indian Sanskrit terms, moksha, liberation, is the taste of that realization of non-duality, that sense of I'm no longer trapped in this container that I see as being me, but I'm fundamentally without any borders. So I am not something that can be trapped, that can be grasped. I'm beyond my ideas of myself, and this isn't just a logical conclusion based on some rational process. It's a direct taste of that experience of no limitation. And when that's experienced in the Aikido, and it's reinforced by the practice of the Aikido, and the principles flow through that experience, then
any techniques are an expression of those principles.
Exactly, right, just naturally so, because they are naturally and inherently inside the process.
And then it's inherently, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's a realization of freedom in the moment, beginning, middle, and end of the process of practicing with uke. There's no, the freedom is there all the time. It's not just there when the person hits the mat, which
and
is
any
where,
and any conflict that arises self-liberates in that moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we don't deny the attack, though. It's not like we go, oh, great, I'm free. Now, I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to sit on my zafu and meditate. But no, there's still that call to respond. But the reason for my response is not out of fear. It's out of that joy of, hey, we're one. And I really want to embody it. I want to express this. I want to share this. I want to live this. And living this under pressure, there's something incredibly powerfully valuable about that. So I think at that initial point, we start to get a feeling that there's something else more than the power game. And the power game is a limited game, as you said. No matter how many tricks of the trade we learn, even internal power, even internal tricks have a shelf life. It's that freedom which fundamentally has no shelf life. It goes irregardless of the capacities that we experience in our bodies, because it's fundamentally inherent in every individual. It's not something you get. from training is something that is uncovered through training, but it was there prior to the training, and that's why it can't be taken away as much as it can't be given.
But it can be lost but when the ego steps in to claim it.
Sure.
Any type of ownership, let's say that some beautiful Aikido moment happens in you, through you, as you, with another person, whatever, grace descends, and then we say, hey, did you see that? I'm going to do it again. Then forget it. It's gone. You can't do that.
Well, I think you put yourself into an unsustainable relationship with it.
Yeah.
Because you're taking credit. Yeah. You're taking credit for something that you can't take credit for. So the ego is trying to contain something that is much bigger than it, and it leads itself to the ego is trying to do something which is not designed to do.
Well, especially if it's a power thing. Yeah. Because you can very easily make the Darth Vader move, and if you just think of Darth Vader as a metaphor, I mean, he had incredible powers, and he used them for his own egoic needs. And like Patrick said, it's not sustainable. He was actually sustained. He was half machine, half man, and he had to plug into a bigger machine to be nourished, to stay alive. And so he could still, his powers kept him alive, but he wasn't, physically, he couldn't sustain that. And I know it's just a kind of a comic book metaphor, but there's something actual about that.
I think it's not so far away from our own experience, in the sense that you see great artists, great musicians, great actors, even great Aikido teachers who fall into this trap, and they open up to something in their art, whether it's painting or on the
spiritual teachers,
or spiritual teachers or whatever.
Sure.
And in that moment of expression, they are embodying that non-dual perspective, and then
living expression of non-duality.
But when that event closes down, their ego comes in. And
may come in.
But some of these, I'm referring to those people that then fall into that trap, where then the ego becomes, there's a trap that an individual can fall into. And I think I've stumbled in that trap many times. Sure. that large perspective and that freedom that shows up on the mat is it is so difficult not to take a personalized relationship to it and draw some conclusions about me as saying, well, that was me, when it actually, no, that was this, that was I, but that I that was expressing through me is the same I that comes through you. And there's you're not further away from that than I am. And we all fundamentally share that equally. It's not something that my ego can take credit for. And yet it's very seductive for the ego to want to jump back in and take some type of credit for that. And I think therein lies a very important detail for people to recognize. I think there's the desire for a non-dual perspective is actually something that can't come from the ego. It has to come, to a certain degree, from itself. A movement from itself that wants to be fully, consciously appreciated, a movement that wants to fundamentally be congruent and coherent and engaged and expressed in time and space. A desire to be authentically connected with the source of one's own being. And I think therein lies some of the precursors that come prior to realization is a realization that in a way, this happened for me, that you realize, no amount of reward in life will ever be satisfying. No amount of money, no amount of fame, no amount of regard, no amount of knowledge or information or anything will be completely and totally satisfying without they themselves are not completely satisfying. And I think there's a realization of that for people who are inspired or wanting to move forward into being available for a perspective of unity with the with life around. A sense that, I really want to wake up to a direct realization of what is true of myself and of the world around me. And I think a desire or a hunger for that becomes priority to a certain degree in an individual who wants to become available for that perspective to rise up in their consciousness. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes, it does. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking, this would be a good time maybe to bring in, if anybody has any questions or comments, definitely raise your hand. You can do it visually, but I prefer that you raise it electronically. Go to the participants button, find the button for the raising your hand, and raise your hand. And we'd love to get some feedback and some questions or sharing, or if you have any comments that you want to join the conversation. Don't hesitate. What I would say...
Heidi has her...
okay, Heidi and Renata. Yeah, I was just going to read Renata's thing, but let's go to Heidi first, and then we'll go to Renata, okay? Yeah, Heidi. Oh, sorry, Heidi. Yeah, your mic's open.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering about the power thing. When I started Aikido, I had not in mind in any ways power over somebody. So I just throw it in. It might be a difference between masculine and feminine. I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
what inspired you first, Heidi, to start Aikido?
I had heard about Aikido, that it is exchanging the energy of who comes and turns it around. And I was fascinated by this idea. And I wanted to experience that.
So there was a skill that you wanted to develop.
No, it was the idea that that you can deviate energy.
Right. Well, that's a skill. That's a skill, right?
At that point, it's a skill, but only the idea. It was that you don't have to be pushed away by whatever energy comes to your way, but you can deviate it. Yeah, maybe you can call it a skill. I was just, the idea was fascinating. Then I heard it is Aikido, and so I went to see it, and I liked the dance, and so I started.
Yeah. That, I think that was something that for myself as well was very attractive. This capacity to move with another person's power rather than against. And I saw it as a skill. I saw it as a form of power, but more as a subtle form of power. And that capacity to do that was something that Aikido offered as a skill in and through the training over time, and it gave a sense of where the body can go, where the mind can go, where the energy can go, and the ability to be able to make that happen, to materialize that, is I think something that can be offered through the practice of Aikido.
Yeah, and I want to come back still to the feminine and masculine aspect. I have experienced in the dojo where I went that the women did it in a different way than the men. I don't know if it is your experience too, but there was a different way of energy, a more caring energy.
Was it cultural or just?
I don't know. It's Italy. In Italy, we, the men are quite macho, so I don't know.
I think there's definitely a masculine, feminine, a male, female gender thing going on there, and you see it all over the world, not just Italy. But I would also say altitudes, because I know you're familiar with integral theory, that some people traditionally Aikido came out of a blue context and then really burst forth with green values, but in an orange context. And in the orange context, there's a lot of achievement. And if mainstream Aikido tends to be less about spirituality and more about, at the very least, about, well, I would say power, but not power over other people, but, just kind of self-regulation, self-control, learning an art, achieving ranks. And it can easily go down a power path. I think once you kind of evolve, or once you kind of move toward, shift into green or exit orange into green, then you have a little bit more the desire to move out of power. It's more about empowerment. About, okay, now how do I find a place where I don't have to fall over, be pushed around so much, or become aggressive, where I can just be myself. And so then it's much more about empowerment. But I would say the mainstream, it's also cultural, depends where you're living in the world. let's just take Japan as an example. Mainstream is far more that orange power path than it is the empowerment path. But it always, wherever, whatever culture there is this kind of background, if not main piece of it is really about the harmony. And that's kind of, integral theory, so there's many different ways to look at it. It's highly complex. But I think what Patrick was talking about before, and certainly what I added, was the shadow side, that, power can be tasty, whether you're standing up in front of the class teaching, or whether you're a senior student telling the beginners, or whether you're a man mansplaining to the women how they should do the technique, or whether you're finding your oats and, you're throwing people harder and crashing and burning. And it's seductive.
Yeah. I think when we look at O Sensei's top students and the ones that came out of that first generation of training, Saito Sensei and Chiba Sensei and
post-war,
yeah. I think they were all fundamentally motivated by power. I didn't see a tremendous number of them or any of them really leap out in terms of awakening as being fundamentally priority, unity, or
it wasn't the orientation.
No.
Yeah.
And so I think as a practice, we have to deal with that issue, and being more fundamentally interested in awakening to our greater sense of being, rather than power. I, for myself, would call that a precursor or a kind of a prerequisite for being available for a non-dual perspective to arrive. If you're interested in power, you're still kind of forming your system around your narrative, and you're still fundamentally drawing that idea that power is the answer to being complete and whole in and of yourself. And that if I amass more power, like more money, more friends, more fame, I will fundamentally, in the end, be successful in my striving to become complete and whole in and of myself. And the realization of non-duality is the realization that that wholeness already exists inside as you are. It is inherently part of your being. And that awakening to that is so liberating that it dissolves that desire for power over or power for oneself. The metaphor I use, and it's similar to Miles, some of the metaphors you've used, is that sense of if we looked at power as water, and that power is something that if you imagine that we all live in the ocean, and a fish is searching for power and searches for power by collecting water, and awakening to the fact that you live in the ocean, you realize you don't need to collect water anymore. You live fundamentally in a place where there's nothing but water. And all of that water that you live in is fundamentally who you are. So there's no needing to acquire power over for oneself when you realize that you fundamentally live in the ocean. And that's a kind of a shift in consciousness akin to non-duality, is the sense that all of what I was striving for in the past was unnecessary, because that striving to acquire for myself, that myself was that limited idea of that I had held, that I'd been told, that I'd been grown up, that I'd been conditioned to accept. And that idea dissolves as the awakening to a non-dual perspective shows up. And it's not that the individual dissolves, it's just the idea about the individual dissolves. And that, I think that's a fundamental shift in consciousness. So that for me, that movement towards a joy in being rather than a desire for power is a strong support for opening up to a non-dual perspective.
Let's say, Patrick, we have another hand up.
Yes.
From I'll open
Renata?
up.
Yeah.
And again, I encourage anybody else who wants to join in with a question or comment to please raise your hand. Renata, your mic's open.
Okay. when I started Aikido, it was I had problems with actually what is power, what is force, what is acting out of fear, and then fighting. Yeah, and I wanted to find out a bit more about that. But it was a power or empowerment issue. But I was fascinated by the principles because I had my husband had read a book and told me about it. And then I decided which martial art, and I decided for Aikido because of this principle of you don't have to take the aggression or the energy of the aggression as what it is, but you can change it and you can go with it. This was fascinating for me from the beginning. And then I went into the training and I recognized, no, I think I won't get more power from that. And if I didn't want it. So it didn't help me in this point, hasn't by now. I've found other ways, but it helped me in another point, and I became more and more fascinated. I haven't really touched this non-duality thing fully, but I'm drawn by it now, and I know now that there's something of changing the whole perspective about it, and this is keeping me there. I've had a few little experiences, but outside the dojo.
Yes.
But would you say those experiences were that your Aikido training helped create the conditions for those experiences, or were they completely separate?
I don't know. I think the fascination I developed through the Aikido training, but also the theoretical things I did at the same time. They added up as one fascination. And this fascination helped me.
Yeah.
Those experiences I had were halfway just in my mind thinking, and halfway real experience. Or I don't know whether it was even only in my mind. But they had a strong thing, something very strong to them.
When you say fascination, Renata, can you describe a little bit more about that fascination? What's the content of that fascination?
Okay, I think I'm not a very successful human being, but when I think at the same time we've all got access to the same, we are kind of the same, and we've got the same kind of possibility to gain this access, and we're just like, I don't know how to say it, things the universe is doing, or expressions of the universe, that it doesn't make such much a difference anymore.
Right.
Well, Renata, what I would add is, because I know you from these meetings and these courses, and I never got the impression from you that you're not a successful human being. In fact, I got the opposite impression.
Okay, it depends on what you define success as.
You'd be okay. Maybe you haven't been successful in tasting the non-duality, but I would even stay open to that. I mean, maybe there's a chance.
Yeah, I believe there will be. Or there is already.
No, that's not what I meant. Maybe you already have tasted it. And then it's just, more, it always begins with some type of taste or some type of glimpse or some type of small opening. And then if you continue to practice, a lot of it has to do with grace. And remember, when I say practice, it's really just setting the conditions and then making yourself available for for the possibility, making yourself available for the possibility that can actually happen.
Yeah.
And not later, not when you get your black belt, Renata.
No, I know.
But now. Right here, now, yeah. I think for myself, the one of the pointers that I've used in the past to get people to kind of taste where this movement comes from is if you've ever had that experience where you've, for some crazy reason, you have just felt a love for all of life, no matter what. And it has gone beyond, it's got nothing to do with likes or dislikes or preferences. It's a grasping that you just, in a certain sense, I get it. I love life. I love the beauty. I love the madness. I love everything. The whole emerging event that we call life. I have this experience of just, I have an unconditional, deep love for it. And that is something that cannot come from the ego. It comes from prior to the ego. It comes from that source of being itself, recognizing itself. And if that's, most everybody I've talked to has, to a certain degree, has had a taste of that at some point in time in their life. And I think that for me is a pointer of where this non-dual, this conscious non-dual recognition of life arises from. Because it's that source of that capacity to be unconditionally connected with all of life, no matter what, in a sense of being able to be with all of life and in a deep, positive relationship with all of life. And I think that's the ground or the foundation for that perspective. So thank you for sharing your voice, Renata.
Thank you, Renata. Well, look, we got about 5 minutes left. If anybody else has a question, you can raise your hand, and if not, maybe I can just say one last thing about the. If you do have a question, raise your hand. But otherwise, power, versus again, a non-dual experience is in and of itself inherently valuable. It has its own inherent value, and if there's a sense of Miles there, a sense of Patrick, a sense of the ego there, you really can't have a full non-dual experience. It has to be a moment where, for whatever reason, that the conditions we've created with a sense of self relaxes profoundly enough that you can actually merge with what's happening in the moment. And like Patrick said, it is inherently love, it is inherently perfect, it is inherently present, it is inherently valuable, and there's no more empowering experience. But it's not the experience of power. Power is always over somebody else. It's always an egoistic thing, even if it's used in a good way, like a surgeon has the power to heal. It's like there's me. I've learned this skill, and I'm going to use it to do heart surgery or brain surgery, whatever. That's great. But on a spiritual path, and Aikido certainly is a higher path of practice, spiritual for many of us here on this call, there's a story of the guru and the guru and the swami. And the swamis were in India, they had these special powers. They developed psychic powers and spiritual powers, where the guru was just resting in non-dual awareness. And there was a swami one day, he had to borrow some money. He went to a money lender, he borrowed the money, and the guy said, okay, you got to come back in 3 months and pay me back. So 3 months passed by, the swami never came to pay him back. So the money lender goes to the swami, and this swami's particular spiritual power was to multiply himself. He could multiply himself to 50. So guy showed up, and there's 50 swamis standing around. Exactly the same swamis. He's like, he didn't know who to get the money from. That's this guy. He said, go to that one. He couldn't get his money back. So he's like, how can I get my money back? The swami, every time I show up, he multiplies himself, and I don't know who to ask for the money. So to answer his question, he goes to the guru, and he tells him the story. This guy makes perfect, exact copies of himself, 50 of them. And what am I going to do? And the guru says, come, let's go together. Let's look at this thing together. So the wise guru, resting in non-duality. And that's like Patrick always says in Aikido, it's the right thing at the right time. You move in the right way at the right time, and everything's perfect. That's what that's the taste of non-duality. So he goes with this guy to see the swami, and sure enough, the swami multiplies him, and the guy says, see, there's 50 perfect copies of the swami. And then the guru says, he says it loud enough for everybody to hear. He says, well, it's amazing. There are 50, but they're not perfect copies. And just then from the back of the crowd of the swamis, one of the swamis stood up and said, what do you mean they're not perfect copies? So he found, the wise guru found the swami that was egoic, that was attached to his spiritual powers. And that's always the taste of power, that there's always an egoic something behind it using power. And whereas the guru, he's just resting in non-dual again, if I use that word guru, but it, you know, it symbolizes resting in non-dual awareness, which has value in and of itself, and always knows what the right response to the situation in the right way, in the right time.
For the right reason.
For the right reason. Patrick, we only have about 3 minutes left.
Sure. I'd just like to mention our event happening in June on the 7th.
Speaking
8th.
of Aikido and non-duality.
Yes, and it's our yearly Riviera seminar, and I know that Bob Pierce is going to be visiting us, and
Great, Bob.
and it would be great to have any of you that are inspired to join us, and we will bend over backwards to find accommodations and family stays if that were necessary, and but it's our yearly Riviera seminar, and we're looking forward to having Miles with us here in the Riviera region, Montreux-Vevey. And so if you're interested in that, you can check out our website, rivieraseminar.com, for more information. And likewise, yeah, we have a couple of different events coming up. And so just keep in touch. This is a very important theme, I think, for both Miles and myself, and trying to breach and bring to a place of conscious discussion and sharing in ways where people feel that they have the space to really enter into it and share their perspective freely. So if there's anybody that has been inspired by this talk and would like to get in touch with me, you feel free to reach out via email. I'm happy to share any process work at a distance with anybody that has questions.
Great. What's the theme for this year's Riviera seminar, Patrick? Evolving together or something?
Evolving together. That's it. Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is what year? 14, 15?
Oh my God. I think
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yes.
Yeah. We'd love to have you guys. And we have a few more Aikido and non-duality events coming up on June the 1st. It's a Saturday, first Saturday of June. We have our next call in this series, Aikido Non-Duality, with Dominique Cassidy, and we'll be. I've had Dominique on a few of these calls.
That should be a great call.
Yeah, not everybody here, but a lot of you here know Dominique, so she'll be sharing her perspective on this. And then Patrick and I are also planning a couple other things, an online course in Aikido Non-Duality, and a retreat on Aikido Non-Duality in Switzerland in the fall, which I believe the place can only hold about 30 people, so it'll be limited in numbers. So you will get information about that coming up in the future, so stay tuned.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you, Miles, for making this happen. And
absolutely.
Thanking everybody for sharing some time together on a Sunday.
Yeah, great, Patrick. And thank you once again for joining the calls. And it's always a pleasure to work together.
Yeah.
Aikido
cool.
and duality. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Sunday.
Okay.
Wherever you are. And happy Mother's Day.
Right. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao, ciao.